Good morning. Welcome to the fourth day of the LuxFLAG Sustainable Investment Week. I'd like to take a moment, though, just to thank you for all of your support during these last difficult months since the tragic passing of LuxFLAG's general manager, Sachin Vankelas. Sachin was a great person, tireless supporter of sustainable finance, and he really exemplified LuxFLAG with his passion, ambition, and drive to a sustainable future. So thanks again for your support. We appreciate it. As chairwoman of LuxFLAG, I'm very pleased to see that after 2 editions, the LuxFLAG Sustainable Investment Week has already gained recognition, and that is thanks to LuxFLAG's associate members who are showcasing this week where they are in the sustainable finance journey. Given the finance industry is in different places and different stages of that journey, this week is about sharing best practices so we all advance towards the goal of making all finance sustainable. For this 3rd edition of the LSIW, we thank you for such a positive response with over 3,500 registrations for the entire week, which is really a great figure. And I'd like to thank our host partners and our media partners for that too. 25 sessions over the week are covering the latest trends and most pressing issues in sustainable finance. And we hope you find inspiration from these events and these sessions and from hearing from our expert speakers. And also see the progress that's being made to harness finance to find solutions to our current environmental and social challenges. Just a few housekeeping points: the slides and the presentation, the recording of the sessions will be made available to you in a week or so. For the Q&A, please do ask your questions because our speakers really do like to hear, want to know what you want to know about, put it that way. And please do ask your questions in the bottom right of the screen that is in front of you. You click on the 3 dots, horizontal dots, and you'll see Q&A, and you can enter your questions there. Thank you. So I'm pleased to introduce today's first session, hosted by Bonn Steichen Partners, and focusing on EU sustainable finance regulation. In particular, where do we stand, what to expect, and how to comply? So that's a lot in an hour, but I know we'll hear a lot of good things from our great speakers. And these, of course, are all questions all financial market participants are having to address. So this deep dive into sustainable finance regulation requirements is very welcome. So I'd like to introduce the moderator for the panel today, Isabel Hogg-Jensen, counsel responsible for sustainable finance at Bonn Steichen Partners. And Isabel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise, for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a warm welcome to our panel discussion. So as Denise mentioned, my name is Isabel Hogg-Jensen, and BSP is very honored to lead today's panel with industry experts to guide us through this evolving and very technical subject that is SFDR. We're very happy to see so many participants have registered today's session, so it certainly shows that there's a very big interest in the subject by the industry. Let me simply remind, as Denise mentioned, that you're all on mute, you can ask questions in the web-based function, and we will take the questions at the end of our session. But before kicking off our discussion, let me shortly present our panelists. On today's panel, we are happy to have Vanessa Müller. Vanessa is the ESG Services Leader and Partner at Ernst & Young Business Advisory Services. Vanessa has more than 17 years of experience in the financial services industry, wealth management, and capital markets. Vanessa focuses on banks, private banks, and market infrastructure institutions. She participated in think tanks on innovation for wealth management and banking sector locally and internationally, striving for a sustainable development of Ernst & Young's client. We're also happy to have Sinor Kaur. Sinor is the Managing Director at Nordea Investment Fund, NIFSA, the Luxembourg-based fund management company of the Nordea Group. Nordea Group is the leading financial services group in the Nordic and Baltic Sea regions. Before joining NIFSA, Ms. Sinor spent her entire professional career in the financial services and asset management industry in various governance-related functions. In her role, she has led many regulatory implementation projects with a focus on the development of pan-European investment solutions. Now, to kick off the discussion, I would just like to take a little step back and recall what asset managers had to do since the 10th March date where the SFDR entered into force. Well, asset managers had to comply and classify the funds as either an Article 6, 8 or 9 fund. The so-called Article 8 fund being a light green fund and the Article 9 fund, the dark green fund, usually impact funds. Well, asset managers also had to be obliged to disclose on their website how they took into account sustainability risk, but also the remuneration policy, that it was consistent with the integration of the sustainability risk, as well as they had to disclose whether they followed PIE, so the principal adverse impact, or not. So this was the so-called level 1, so the regulation per se. But now we also have the level 2, the regulatory technical standards, that lays down the content and the form onto how to disclose and what to publish on the website. And those are not final yet. It's expected to have the final version to be published before the year end. So for the time being, all asset managers comply with the RTS draft on a best effort basis while waiting for the final draft. The European Commission, as you might know, also mentioned that it will publish one single rulebook covering RTS, laying down the content, methodology, and disclosures according to SFDR, but also tying in the taxonomy-related disclosure. Now, bearing in mind that the taxonomy regulation enters into force only on the 1st of January 22nd, and the final RTS enters into force on 1st of July 22nd, well, it's not made easier for the asset managers to comply, since there are so many different dates of entry into force for the different provisions. Perhaps we can also mention that the European Commission respond to the letter that was addressed to them by the ESAs, so the European Supervisory Authorities, in relation to the application of FFTR. So that took the form of a Q&A, and amongst some of the answers, it was clarified that registered IFMs, so below thresholds IFM, are also in scope of the SFDR, both at entity and at product level. Now, if we look at the timeline, there are several important dates to comply with in 2022. On 1st January 22, according to the taxonomy regulation, the periodic reports for Article 8 funds and 9 funds are becoming mandatory. On the 30th of June 22nd, asset managers who had more than 500 employees, so worldwide, EU and outside EU, had to take into account the PIE, and they will have to report by the 30th of June 22nd on the PIE. 1st of July 22nd, we have the RTS final version that will enter into force. And on the 30th of December, same year, we have the annual PIE reporting that will start. 1st of January 23, all the taxonomy measures will apply, so all the other environmental objectives. And last but not least, on the 30th of June 23, asset managers should report the first PIE by reference period. So, as you can see, a very challenging timeline ahead indeed. So the SFDR raises a certain number of challenges with respect to the transparency rules that are applicable to the fund that you manage as an asset manager. So the greener the fund, well, the more you have to disclose. For instance, for Article 8 and 9 funds, it's required, among others, to describe the portion of assets aligned with ESG characteristics, but also to describe the use of sustainable indicators to measure those characteristics. And now I would like to turn to the panel, perhaps first to you, Sinor, because I would like to ask you, how did you really cope with these difficult transparency rules?
Yes, Isabel, and it's undoubtedly a challenge for Nordea. And so far, we've addressed these transparency rules by providing more sort of qualitative information. And since 10th of March, what we have done is that we have published on our website a number of information to enhance the transparency towards our investors. And for example, with respect to Article 8 and Article 9 funds, we have described the environmental and social methodology that we apply in order to achieve the E and the S characteristics and the sustainable objectives. These characteristics takes into account, amongst other, our norms-based screening, our exclusion list such as tobacco filter, our principal adverse impact, the so-called PIE integration, our Paris-aligned fossil fuel policy, and that is just to name a few. And today, investors can find in our pre-contractual document and in our website a table which actually shows which E and S characteristics were considered for a specific fund. And over time, as we're collecting more and more reliable data, we will be able to better quantify the portion of assets that are aligned with the ESG characteristics.
Interesting. And Vanessa, you as a sustainable service provider, what are your insights on the same subject as Sinor?
Yeah, definitely I agree with the fact that these requirements raise a lot of questions from investors and asset managers, as it requires specific knowledge on their own activities, but as well on the investee companies with regards to sustainability. And we often see during client projects that even the understanding and the description of sustainable indicators is as such sometimes already an issue, especially in light of evolving regulation. For example, we see many entities relying on ESG scoring, whereby scoring might not fully embrace the latest sustainability indicators required by SFDR or taxonomy. And also, it's not always straightforward to understand actually what data is needed for what specific requirements. And that goes back to I would say, one of the most important challenges, the data availability. And when the data is not available to the fund manager, either because the investee company has not yet implemented processes of assessment, or simply because such data is not covered by data providers, investors actually want to know how to proceed and estimate this portion. So this data challenge is linked to the fact that the evolution and finalization of the regulation is taking time. And the difficulty really lies from what we see in starting the process of reporting and defining an approach, either using external solutions and governance, cross-checking across different data providers, developing internal solutions, etc. So there will be a transition to maturity, and I think that, as you mentioned in your intro, Isabel, institutions need to adopt best efforts procedures to prepare for what is coming.
Now, as mentioned before, on 1st of January, we have the periodic reports for Article 8 and 9 that need to include the information on the environmental objective to which the underlying financial product contributes. And this by using quantitative and qualitative indicators, as you already mentioned before, but also to comply with the principle of do not significantly harm. Now, Vanessa, to start with you, what would be your insights and advice on that specific point?
Yeah, so without wanting to fall in the cliche, but behind any challenge, there's obviously an opportunity. Let's put it that way. So as you have shown on the timeline, there's a constant need to read, anticipate and apply an evolving regulation. And we also know we must be conscious, I think, that the level of maturity, but as well the critical mass and time to decrypt the regulatory roadmap is not the same along the different actors that fall under the regulation. And on projects and in discussions, we're often asked to refer to market practices, how others actually approach these questions. What are the expectations from the regulator, from the local regulator more specifically? What are think tanks and guides of associations, etc. And also, yeah, well, obviously the request for external support in regulatory watch and implementation. And those are solutions that exist. On the data, again, we mentioned the challenge linked to the lack of data as such. This will be an incremental process for larger data providers, or there will be the development of internal solutions as well. We are also regularly in touch with innovative solutions on the market, like startups from the green tech that can complement actually bigger solutions. With niche services on data screening and analysis. For instance, we see some that are looking at controversy on social media, and that can also provide a rather agile utilization model. So again, there's more regulation to come. So anyway, it's important to build, I would say, solid foundations for future ESG requirements and reporting.
Interesting. And Sinor, how are you getting then prepared for that date to kick in on 1st of January?
I think, as Vanessa mentioned, the data aspect is definitely one of the biggest challenges that we see across the industry. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we have within Nordea, we have sort of started by providing a more qualitative way to address this aspect, and then we're trying to get more granular with quantitative indicators as the regulations evolves. But given the size of our Nordea Asset Management investment universe across our investment boutiques and strategies, we use a range of external ESG data providers, as well as internal research and also our proprietary ESG scoring platform. Our teams assess the quality of all these internal and external data on an ongoing basis, and then continuously assess if new data providers can improve their analysis and models over time. And we've also implemented what we call a supplier code of conduct that we request each data provider to respect. And that means that before engaging with a data provider, we actually conduct an extensive and thorough market research where we assess criteria such as data quality, coverage, security, methodology, just to make sure that we engage with a data provider which we think is fitting with our expectations. And I would say that the challenge that we face today with actually the amount of data that we collect is to find a scalable way to handle them. Considering that the data are sourced from different places, as I said, internally and externally, and handled currently manually, it's really important for us to find some more automated solutions to adequately use them in the future.
Yeah, and then how does this all tie in now with the CSRD and what are the main challenges there? So as you mentioned, lack of data, what would be your main challenges in this respect?
I think once we will be able I mean, over time as things develop, I think we'll get more and more transparency and more consistent information for investors to be able to compare and to get more insight into the investment process. And then we will have also, I mean, in my view, this will also be a lot of benefit to the investors, because then they will be able to compare and get more data that are reliable going forward as well.
Vanessa, do you agree with Tina on that point as well, or you have a different view or something to add? You wish to add there?
No, definitely. I think it's it will feed the challenge that we have today with regards to data, and bring some synergies. So ensuring that also companies report the information that the investors are looking at. Knowing, however, that they will face the same type of problems on the underlying ground, they will also have to identify what they need to report on and make sure that this is actually matching the different standards and the indicators that are fixed in the SFDR and taxonomy. Normally, this should be the case, but again, I think even at their level, it's not easy information to get to. This is a process that we see is being prepared across industries, and I would say that the interesting and good news is that many actors are starting the process and getting prepared, even though this is only about a reporting for the year 2023. So it's in a bit of time, but we see already a lot of movement in that direction.
Which is, I guess, a good thing also, to start, yes. Mm-hmm. Now, the taxonomy regulation then, as mentioned before, on the timeline will then kick in on 1st of January 2022. And that's then with respect to the two environmental objectives, so the climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. Now, on that side, Vanessa, I turn to you as a reporting expert here. What are the reporting challenges that you will see there as a service provider?
Yeah, thanks. I think here, again, I'm sorry to repeat a bit, but since the regulation is still evolving as well, and again, the point on the data that we explained, It's not always fully clear as to how to proceed, and we have many questions on this as well. Not all activities are covered, so one challenge that we witness on the market is really the question of, for instance, what to do for activities that are not covered. It does not necessarily mean that they are harmful for the climate. How can they be categorized, and most of all, how can this be interpreted on company disclosures? So the EU Commission has already developed a framework that is dividing activities into the 3 categories of contributing, enabling, or transitioning. However, again, not all sectors are covered yet, and yeah, there's a bit of lack in for the financial industry. Activities or sustainable objectives, such as the social objectives, that are not covered yet by the taxonomy. Still, I believe that we can rely on the definition of sustainable investments given by SFDR, and also go back to market best practices.
Sinor, do you have anything to add on Vanessa's view there?
No, I think I fully agree with what just Vanessa mentioned, and I think it's a real challenge, the taxonomy alignment, in terms of to get the data that are reliable and that speak for themselves, especially for certain sector. In terms of coverage, we have some sector that are very well covered, where others, I think it's still very poor in terms of information. So for the moment, what we have done is that we will provide a more descriptive way of taxonomy alignment in our next prospectus update. But of course, the challenge is indeed on finding the data that are relevant.
Yes. Thank you, Sinor and Vanessa. Now going to our next question. SFDR RTS requires asset managers to take into account, so the PI, the principal adverse impact of investment decisions on sustainability factors. So, and also to publish on the website, among others, the description of their due diligence policy. And on the identification of PI and relevant indicators. So the reporting on PI, it's each year on the 30th of June, requires some of the information to be disclosed by way of reference to the preference calendar year. So regarding to that, Sinor, would you like to give us an insight from Nadia on this challenge?
Sure. And I have to say we've decided within Nordea to comply with PI at entity level across all the assets that we manage. And the reason for that was simply because these controls or monitoring, our principles, were already embedded in our process and within our responsible investment team. So it wasn't an additional task that we had to perform, and reason why we've decided since the 10th of March to actually publish a statement on our website, which describes our methodology that we use to assess each principal adverse impact. And our teams monitor and evaluate a range of PI indicators. And as the availability of data improves, we seek to add more indicators. Those where we can list, for example, the greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity, water, waste, and human rights are those are the main indicators that we look into, but not solely those ones. And subject to data availability, of course, our responsible investment team monitors the selected PI indicators using an internally developed monitoring system that we call the PI engine. And the way it works is that companies that are outliers on specific indicators, or which shows a high adverse impact across several indicators, are identified based on data that we acquire either from third-party providers or through our internal analysis. And then these companies are further analyzed by our responsible investment team, which then escalate relevant cases into our responsible investment committee. And furthermore, PI is an input to our internal ESG scoring methodology, which we apply to a selection of products. And finally, PI is also used by some internal investment boutiques as a direct input to the investment process. So you can hear that this PI process is really embedded within our entire value chain and entire investment management process. And maybe just to jump on the slide that you showed, Isabel, with in terms of timeline, one of the next challenge that we're looking into, especially when it comes to the MiFID Delegated Act, is a question as to how would we apply PI when it comes to the product aspect in order for a product to be MiFID eligible? Could we perhaps conduct a PI at the level of the asset class or a sector? So all of these questions are what we're looking into right now.
Interesting, yes. And Vanessa, what is your view on what Sina just mentioned?
Yeah. Now, PI is also a complex topic to address from what we see on the different projects that we have. Again, we should note here that ESG is not, maybe not yet, but not the core business and expertise of all players in scope of the regulation. So together with the challenge of maturity of the players that I was explaining, there's also clearly one link to the technicity of the regulation, starting really with the understanding of what exactly is the definition, what is required, etc. And another thing is that once the comply mechanism encompass consideration of PI of investment decisions, financial market participants that decide not to apply comply mechanism must apply the explain mechanism and provide also clear reasons for why they do not consider adverse impacts of investment decisions or sustainability factors. And there, once you start this discussion, you really go into, okay, what is the direction that you want to give to ESG within your institution, and what is a bit the strategy, and what is it that you want to disclose. And if you do not comply, still you have to explain why, and being transparent about that, and also starting explaining most likely in the future how you will take them into consideration. So it's a process that takes a bit of time, and somehow sometimes we feel like some institutions are in the position of having to start with the regulation, reportings, etc., while not necessarily having put the foundations of the ESG strategy. So I think this is definitely an important topic as well.
If I may just chip in on what you said, Vanessa, I think it's extremely important to set the strategy. Indeed, I think SFDR is about disclosure. So it's important to look at that each financial participant is looking into its existing process and see whether, and disclose that in a transparent way to the investors. And then, of course, the decision to transition or to adapt or to upgrade is then part of this strategy, which is really important, as you say, Vanessa, to set the foundation and then define what are the next actions or next steps to take.
Just I want to just hear a bit your views, and Vanessa and Sina, one good recommendation now to the participants we have today, how to tackle the future. Do you have what is your, if you just should take one key takeaway, what would it be? Then perhaps Vanessa, would you like to start?
Yeah, yes, no, good question. And we often get the questions of why am I supposed to do this reporting if the definition is not yet ready? So first, I would say that, as we just explained, it's important to have, it doesn't mean to have like a big, I don't know, 100-page strategy, etc. about ESG, but at least to know the direction that you want to give to this very important topic. And I believe that at some point of time, this will be embedded in the business as usual strategy, if I can put it that way. So for me, this is a very first step to do. Step back a bit and consider, okay, what is it that I want to do with and about ESG? And then secondly, we said it here during the panel, the regulation is evolving. The enablers from a technology perspective, but as well from an operational perspective, are evolving as well. Now, the spirit of SFDR is very much about transparency and taking care also of, or making sure that investors know what you are doing, which doesn't mean that you need to do everything now already. So it's a stepped approach as well. I believe that depending on your capacity to have or not a department dedicated to that topic, or really very much pushed activities, you have to have a pragmatic approach and take the steps as they come. I also believe that regulators and supervisory entities and associations, they need also to be supportive in this respect. And again, I see this as a transition and as a journey, rather than now as to everything has to be in place in the target state.
Fully agree. And Senor, you take away.
Fully agree as well. I think indeed that there are still a lot of uncertainties within the regulations and room for interpretation. So I guess that's very much a sign of transition, and again, one should not forget that the idea is still disclosing in a transparent manner what we do as asset managers towards our investors, and I think that is very much the core aspect of all this regulation. So it's indeed taking a step back, looking into how you do things, what processes do you have, map them again, what we know that is already in place. And as you said also in the introduction, Isabel, we have the draft RTS, which we can work with already, and have a bit of insight as to which direction the transition is taking. So step-by-step plan is obviously I think what I would recommend.
That's a good recommendation, I guess. So I'm just looking now at our question. We have a question from the floor. So given the periodic reporting deadline for SFDR is earlier than the expected introduction of CSRD, practically, how will asset managers then deal with the lack of company data in the first periodic reporting in 22? Vanessa, will you like to take that one first, or?
Yeah, I think that's the very good question that we often have. We touched a bit upon it now during our conversation. So again, here it's about a step-by-step approach. There is already some basis existing via taxonomy or via SFDR that needs to serve as a reference, I would say. And then in terms of accessing the data, yeah, again, in the sense of knowing where you want to go, one should also define how they make sure to get the data. Is it one data provider? Is it checking with a second one? Obviously, knowing also the costs that are behind this aspect. Is it looking manually on in different sources and then trying to put that all together? So there is, from an operational perspective, some process that need to be put in place. So there is work to do in this respect, and it has to rely on the foundations that exist today with SFDR and taxonomy. And all this will be fed with CSRD and probably also the rest of the definitions coming from the taxonomy with the time, and make it more easy as well in the future.
Senor, do you have anything to add on that
yes,
question?
I mean, it's if I had the answer to that question, I would be really happy, because it's definitely a challenge that the timeline doesn't coincide with the date whereby investee companies need to also provide their own statements. So I guess it's what we have alluded within our conversation earlier, that the data that we need to feed either through external service providers or with internal research, and the bulk of this data would be used to be aggregated and compiled for the reporting. I think one of the challenges as well is to see on the data that we will use in terms of the financial, the periodic reporting, whether that stands on as the figures that we would need to disclose will be on the commitment, or whether that it would be on a date which coincide with the financial reporting date. So I think there's again room for interpretation, and we will see along the lines, and as the regulation evolves, whether we get more precision around the reporting information.
Now I see there's another question here. So CSRD will only cover EU companies. Now, what about the non-EU company data then? Vanessa, you want to?
No, fair question. Fair question. So I think again that's so CSRD imposes these requirements to a certain number of companies. So this will be one additional pillar of information that is very important. Then again, depending on how you get to the data, there are other sources that allow as well to get information on non-EU companies. And I must say as well that what we see now out of our global network as well is that this question is also taken seriously outside of Europe. So maybe not necessarily because there is a regulation that imposes some reporting, but simply also because those companies have activities back in the European Union, or because they see as well that this is an increasing expectation from investors as well, but also all along the value chain, from suppliers, partners, business partners, clients, etc. So we also have conversations with non-EU countries within EY that are asking us how the regulation in the EU looks like, and how they can leverage it as well outside of the EU. So again, not a black or white answer, but a transition, I would say, in this aspect as well.
I don't know, Signor, if you have anything to add on that one as well, or?
Yes, I mean it's indeed a very good question. But what I can say from our asset management practice is that we can already see an evolvement in between 10th of March and today, especially in the US, where I think they have made a real effort and a lot of development in that space for the last months, and I think they're catching up very fast. And as you say, Vanessa, I think it's very much driven from an investor perspective, and in particular when it comes to global asset managers, which have a business also outside of the EU, and which look into this in order to address investors' preference as well. So I think we will most likely in the coming months see a lot of evolution in this continent.
Yeah, so a lot still to be done and to look forward. I think indeed the next year is going to be a challenging year for everybody, but I hope that we will have more clarity also next year. So I think it's slowly time for us to close this session. It's time for me to thank you for attending our event. Thank you to the panelists for their very great insight and valuable contribution. As mentioned, next year is going to be a challenging year in terms of SFDR, CRD, taxonomy, etc. And for sure, sustainable finance will stay on the agenda for the many next years to come. Thank you very much for attending again, and we wish you a very nice day. Thank you.
Thank you. if I could just have one last word.
Sure,
So I
Denise,
can
sorry.
thank, so I
Pass
can,
back to you. Yes.
so I can also thank you to our excellent speakers and for fielding difficult questions in a with real answers, if you will, but being realistic too. Of course, as you said, there's lots to do and lots to develop, and next year will be an interesting year. That's for sure. But also, I think that's why sessions like this are so important, and sharing of best practices and what people are doing, because clearly it's a journey we're all on together, if you will. But again, thank you to the speakers. Thank you to Bonn Steichen and Partners for hosting the event, and a big thanks to the LuxFLAG team for making it all happen. And finally, I'd like to end with a quote that I hope will resonate with everyone. We now understand that sustainable finance is not just another type of investment, it's a complete shift of mindset. And I think we heard some of that during the panel session as well. So thank you again. Our next session will start at 10 a.m., excuse me. It's been a long week, 10 a.m. And the title of the session, it's hosted by Degroof Petercam Asset Management, and it's entitled Destination Impact in capital letters. Is SFDR the answer? So thank you again. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye all.